So it's 11 o'clock at night, and I have broken down in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. So, being the mechanic that I am, I whipped out my best tool, my iPhone, and I call AAA. So, fast forwarding a bit, I find myself in the back of a tow truck. It's a father and son tow truck. There's this gentleman who's about 250 and built like a tank, and his 11-year-old son. And a few minutes into the ride, I get a oh so familiar question. So, what do you do? Well, as a scientist, that question can be quite difficult sometimes. And a lot of us go, oh, here we go again. They won't understand. It's too complicated. And we make up a lot of excuses sometimes to wiggle out of it. Because it is difficult to answer that question in a simple way. But I told him I'm a scientist. And then I met with this question at the lab, kind of a hostile inquiry. And so, yeah, I work at the lab. And after a series of strong misconceptions about what we do here at the lab, I started talking about HIV vaccine that we've developed here, cancer research, medical isotopes, handheld satellites. And the tone started to change. They started warming up to the idea of, wow, well, the lab really does some cool stuff. And it's actually pretty important to me. And then something really amazing happened. Both the father and the son started asking questions. They started asking questions about cancer, which led them to genetics and then epigenetics. And then they started connecting the dots. It was a really cool experience. Uh, the kid was getting excited, and the father was really engaged with him and me, and it's a very, very insightful experience. Well, our 3 hour journey of epigenetics, cancer research, supercomputing ended with a very firm handshake from this tank of a man and a lasting comment. He said, "You know, I've lived in Santa Fe my whole life, and I've never met a scientist." He said, "I'd like to thank you for answering these questions, uh, questions that I've never been able to ask." And that really hit home. I'm like, wow, this guy, he lives 45 minutes away from one of the world's densest populations of scientists at one of the best labs in the world. And he's never met a scientist. He's never had an opportunity to ask a question. What is cancer? How are we doing in the research? What's alternative energy? And it got me thinking, he's a voter. He votes for politicians that will go to Washington, D.C. and vote on these issues. And as scientists, we often complain, oh, my budget's too small, they're cutting this, they're cutting that. Well, who's to blame in all of that? Well, you can't rightfully blame one person or one entity, but as a scientist, I feel like it's partially our fault. Because when we're met with the question, what do you do? Our response is often so convoluted and filled with acronyms and jargon that, of course, why would anyone want to support science if they know nothing about it? Here's a man who lives 45 minutes away and really had no understanding of what we do here at the lab or what science is really and how important it is to his life and the technologies that he uses and the health of him and his family members. So it got me thinking. I wanted to start something that would kind of break down these barriers between scientists and the public. So I created something called Open Scientist, and it's still an evolving nonprofit. But I came up with the idea of something called Ask a Scientist. And it's very simple. Graduate students, professors, staff scientists, they go out to a city, maybe Santa Fe, or I'm from Birmingham, so I'm interested in doing this in Birmingham, Alabama. And we set up booths all around the city. And there's 4 or 5 graduate students or professors, and literally, people can just come up to them and ask questions about science. And we can start interacting with the public a lot better because in reality, it's their money that we're using for this research. And if science is so important to their way of life and their future health and use of technology, then they should be aware of that. Uh, so, Ask a Scientist is just that. It's an open forum in as many cities as I can get this running in to engage the public in science topics that are relevant to them. Even more so, science topics that are being developed in their community. So in Birmingham, we have something called Southern Research Institute, which develops cancer drugs. It looks at immunology. It looks at very important health-related things. It's a medical school, and most of the public doesn't know it exists. Most of the students at the university right next to it doesn't know what it does. That's a problem. And if we really want to engage the public so that we can have increased understanding of science and subsequent increase in funding for science, then the public needs to become more aware. So Open Scientist is also a online resource for people. The idea is that Wikipedia is too complicated. If I type in photoelectric effect, I have a BS in physics, and sometimes you scroll down, that stuff gets kind of complicated. And as a normal person, I would get turned off in the first few sentences. So the second part of Open Scientist is a elevator pitch Wikipedia, basically, where you have 30 seconds and you explain a scientific topic on terms that people can understand. And I'd like to do that for a lot of topics. It'd be peer reviewed, and hopefully it would be a better way to engage the public in accessible terms. So this is my idea, Open Scientist. As of yesterday, just making a few phone calls. I have people at the NIH, University of Tennessee at Knoxville, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Alabama, Georgia Tech that are all interested in doing Ask a Scientist. So if this talk is chosen to be done here at Los Alamos, I feel like it'd be a great forum to get the idea out there and start a dialogue with scientists, not only to just change their behavior on how they react to public inquiries about science, but also to maybe try and get a Ask a Scientist movement moving and get a public perception of science up so that we can all have a better livelihood in the community. Thank you.